I remember the first night I stepped into the sheriff's station like it was a shadow stretching across the wall behind me. The place smelled of old coffee and wax floors, a faint metallic tang beneath it that I couldn't place. I was 22, green, still carrying that nervous energy that made me double-check my uniform every few minutes. Nothing about that night prepared me for the silence I was about to face. The graveyard shift starts slow. No lights flickering. No frantic reports screaming across the radio. Just a low hum of the fluorescent bulbs overhead. I sat at my desk, feeling the plastic chair press into my thighs, my fingers drumming nervously against the laminate surface. The dispatcher handed me the headset, her eyes distant, like she'd already been somewhere I wasn't ready to go. "First night?" she asked, her voice flat, professional. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yeah, first night alone. She didn't say anything else, just nodded, as if that explained everything. I stared at the radio, half expecting it to roar to life, crackling with some urgent call. But nothing came. Minutes stretched into an hour. The hum of the fluorescent lights became a rhythm, a pulse that seemed louder than it should. And then came the first call. The voice was quiet, too quiet, like it had been filtered through a long, empty tunnel. "Dispatch? You copy?" I fumbled with the controls. "Yeah, this is Deputy Miles." "Who's calling?" Silence, then a crackle, followed by a soft, raspy whisper. It sounded like someone struggling to speak. "I can't move." I froze. The blood in my veins didn't just slow. It seemed to pool somewhere heavy in my chest. "Where are you? Are you hurt? I need your location." No answer, just a faint sound of breathing, ragged and shallow. I leaned forward, gripping the headset tighter, my knuckles turning white. The air in the room felt heavier, suddenly, like it had weight, pressing down on my shoulders, my chest. I tried to tell myself it was nerves. First night, my mind playing tricks. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "Please don't come." The words made no sense. Why would someone call for help and then tell you not to come? My stomach twisted, a cold knot forming. I tried to reply, but my voice felt swallowed by the thick air. "I need your location." Static, then silence. I set the headset down, shaking. My eyes darted to the other phones on the desk, the monitors, the screens. Everything was normal, perfectly still, perfectly quiet. The station itself seemed to hold its breath. I leaned back, trying to steady myself, telling myself I imagined it, that it was some prank or misdial. But the feeling, the weight of the air, was real. Hours passed. No calls. Just me, the hum of the lights, the faint tick of a clock somewhere down the hall. I tried to occupy myself, logging reports, checking paperwork. But every little sound, creak of a floorboard, sigh of the vent, made me jump. I could feel eyes on me, though no one was there. It's a ridiculous thought now, but at the time it wasn't. Not completely. Around 3 in the morning, the radio crackled again. I instinctively reached for it. "Dispatch, go ahead." Nothing. Then a voice so soft I could barely hear over my own heartbeat. "They are here." I froze mid-sentence. The hairs on my arms prickled. Standing straight up, my mind raced. Who? What? The station was empty. There was no one out there. The sheriff's office is tucked in a quiet town where nothing happens this late. Nothing real, anyway, but my gut didn't care about logic. My gut told me there was someone or something out there just beyond the circle of light cast by the station windows. I tried to call back. "Who is there?" "What do you mean?" Static, and then a whisper, clearer this time, almost right next to my ear. "Watch the walls." I spun around, half expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing, just the pale green of the walls and the shadows cast by the blinking monitors. My chest felt tight, my breath shallow. The chair creaked under me as I shifted, trying to tell myself it was nerves, that I was alone and safe. But the voice, that voice lingered in my mind, like a cold finger tracing my spine. Time lost meaning after that. The hours dragged, a slow crawl. Every call that came to the radio was mundane, trivial, an abandoned car, a barking dog, a trespassing report, but the emptiness between them was deafening. I found myself leaning forward, straining to hear something more, anything more from the first call, but it never came, just the silence, thick, suffocating silence. I kept glancing at the clock. 4:35. The lights flickered briefly, and I swear I heard the faintest scrape of a shoe against the floor behind me. I whipped around. Nothing. The sound was gone. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things. My pulse was loud in my ears, the only sound that felt real. I went to make coffee, shaking slightly, hands trembling as I poured the water. The smell of burnt coffee filled the room. I sipped it, trying to ground myself, trying to make sense of what was happening. And that's when I noticed it. The shadow in the corner of the room. It was faint, darker than the darkness, impossible to ignore. My mind screamed that it was nothing, just a trick of the light. But every instinct I had told me it was wrong. Alive, maybe, watching, waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thicker than ever, a weight pressing down on my chest, pushing me back into the chair. The radio clicked again. A static-laced voice, not quite human, not quite a ghost, somewhere between whispered, "You shouldn't be here." I yanked off the headset, nearly dropping it. My hands shook. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, wanted to be anywhere else. But I was a deputy, or at least trying to be one, and part of me couldn't leave the station. I stayed, heart hammering, staring at the shadows, waiting, praying that daylight would come and that this was all just a nightmare. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. My mind wandered back to the first call, the voice that begged me not to come. I could feel it echoing in my skull, impossible to shake. And then, faintly, I heard a second voice, a reply, low, guttural, terrifying. The two voices merged into static, unintelligible, but I understood the threat, not just to the person who had called. To me, the clock struck 6. Morning light started creeping in through the blinds. The shadows retreated slightly, as if forced away by the day. My legs were stiff, my arms numb, my brain exhausted from the tension. I sat back in my chair, breathing shakily. No one ever called about that first voice again. No one ever explained it. And every shift after that, I felt that same weight in the station, the same creeping sensation that I wasn't alone, that something was always listening. I tell myself now that it was stress, nerves, the imagination of a rookie. Maybe it was. But sometimes in the quiet moments just before midnight, when the town sleeps and the radio is dead silent, I still hear it. The faintest whisper of a voice calling for help and telling me not to come. And I know that if I listen too closely, if I let myself lean in, I might hear it again. It started with small things. Reports that seemed almost ordinary at first. People not showing up for work. Neighbors claiming someone hadn't been seen for days. I remember staring at the log, my eyes tracking the names, the ages, the addresses, and feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the AC. There was a rhythm to it, a pattern that should have made sense on paper, but didn't. The sheriff pulled me aside that night, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He's an older man, gray at the temples, and his eyes carried the weight of 1,000 nights like this. He didn't speak much. He rarely does. But when he does, it's like the words themselves are heavy, as if they could bend the air. "You're seeing it too," he said. No preamble, no question. I nodded slowly. I didn't know what else to do. I had been at the station for barely a month, still green, still trying to keep my composure. But yes, I was seeing it, or at least feeling it. The absence behind the absence. The quiet that fills a room when someone is gone and the world is pretending they never existed. He led me to the map pinned on the wall, a collection of pushpins marking missing persons, each one a tiny dot of dread. Every one of these, he said, his finger tracing the cold paper, vanished between 2 and 4 in the morning, always near empty stretches of road or abandoned fields. Nothing else, no witnesses, no clues. I leaned closer. I tried to make sense of it. Names, dates, places. The dots began to feel like stars, constellations in the sky made of fear. The sheriff didn't need to say more. The pattern spoke for itself. That night, I went out on patrol with Deputy Ramos. He's been around longer than I have, The kind of man who has memorized the roads, the houses, the people. I thought having him there would make the night easier. Maybe it did at first. The roads were empty, the town asleep under a thick blanket of fog. Our headlights cut through it, revealing stretches of pavement that seemed to twist and stretch farther than they should. I try to focus on the usual. Street signs, mailbox numbers, the distant glow of porch lights. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something moved just beyond the beams. Shadows that weren't quite ours, flitting at the edge of vision, disappearing when I tried to look directly at them. Ramos laughed once, a short, sharp sound. "You see that?" he asked, pointing at a roadside tree. I squinted. Nothing, just a silhouette of branches against the fog. "You see it?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted to. He shook his head. "No, you're just tired, rookie. Keep your eyes on the road." I didn't reply. I wanted to, but the words fell heavy in my mouth. The shadows lingered, coiling along the edges of the fog, following us, or maybe waiting. I couldn't tell. And then it happened. We reached a stretch of road that wound around the edge of town, the kind of place where a car could vanish and no one would ever know. Ramos slowed. "This is it," he muttered. The last place the Jensen boy was seen. Vanished without a trace. Truck was still running in the driveway. No tire marks. No footprints. Nothing. I swallowed. I tried to picture it. A teenage boy gone in the middle of the night, leaving no hint behind. I had seen reports, read the notes. But this standing here, feeling the fog wrap around us, made it different, realer, more threatening. The sheriff's words from earlier echoed in my mind. The absence behind the absence. That invisible shape of nothingness that made rooms and roads feel heavier, as if the air itself remembered the missing. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine. The fog thickened, clinging to the car, to our jackets, to our skin. It wasn't wind. It wasn't mist. It had weight, presence. Something in it was moving just out of sight. Ramos tapped the dashboard. "See anything?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that shadows were crawling along the edges of the road, that shapes were moving inside the fog, that the air was thick with a cold pressure that pressed at my chest. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not without sounding insane. We drove on. The radio stayed dead, as if afraid to wake whatever was hiding in the fog. Every mailbox, every fence post, every curve in the road seemed to echo with emptiness. I tried to remember the Jensen boy, and the other names pinned on the sheriff's map, as if thinking of them would protect me. We stopped at an intersection where 3 more disappearances had been reported. I stepped out of the car, boots crunching on gravel, heart hammering. I called into the darkness. "Anyone there?" Nothing. And then, for the briefest moment, I thought I saw him, a shadow in the corner of my eye, crouched near the ditch, watching. It didn't move like a person. It didn't breathe, but it was there, waiting. I blinked. Nothing. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining it, but the memory of that shape stayed, pressing into my mind like a warning. Something followed us. Something patient. Something that could wait longer than I could stand still. We got back in the car. I couldn't speak. Ramos hummed some old tune, trying to break the tension. I stared out the windshield, watching the fog twist, watching the shapes that weren't there. Hours passed. Each call on the radio was mundane, unthreatening, yet the emptiness between them grew heavier, deeper. I found myself glancing into the back seat, half expecting to see a figure that wasn't ours, crouched in silence. I didn't see anything. Not really. But I felt it. The weight, the pressure, the quiet accusation of the missing, whispering to me that I was next if I didn't watch, if I didn't understand. By the time we returned to the station, I was shaking. The sheriff was there, waiting, leaning against the counter like he'd been expecting us. His eyes scanned my face, reading every worry, every flicker of fear. "They're growing bolder," he said. "Every night, a little closer. Every night, a little more visible." I swallowed, trying to form a response. Words failed me. I remembered the shadows on the road, the way the fog pressed, the shapes that didn't belong. I remembered the fear in the Jensen boys' parents' eyes, even if they didn't know what had happened. "You'll see it soon enough," the sheriff added quietly. Not in the reports, Not in the logs, in the corners of your eyes, in the corners of your mind. You'll know when it's real. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell him I wasn't ready, that I wasn't strong enough. But the truth was, I already knew. I had seen it, felt it, and the thought of going back out into the fog, into the empty streets, made my stomach churn. That night, after Ramos left, I stayed behind, trying to log patrol reports, trying and pretend I understood what was happening. The shadows in the corners of the station seemed longer, thicker, reaching farther than they should. I kept catching glimpses, fleeting, impossible, in the reflection of a window or a monitor screen, always gone when I turned to face it directly. And I realized then that it wasn't just the missing people I was worried about. It was me. The air was thicker here too. The shadows weren't just outside. They were creeping inside, curling into the corners of my mind, whispering in the silence between the radio calls. Sleep didn't come easy that morning. I stared at the ceiling, listening to hum of the station, imagining shapes moving just beyond the walls. Every bump, every creak felt deliberate, calculated, watching, waiting, and I knew, before I even closed my eyes, that this was only the beginning. The vanishings weren't random. They were a message, a pattern I wasn't meant to understand yet. And if I wasn't careful, if I didn't pay attention, I would be next to disappear. I stayed late that night, long after Ramos had left and the fog outside had swallowed the streets. The station felt enormous when it was empty. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead sounded like a chant, constant and low, pressing against my ears. I tried to focus on paperwork, reports, anything to make myself believe I wasn't alone. But the moment I sat down, silence wrapped around me so tightly I could hear my own pulse. It started with the radio. A crackle, a faint static hiss, nothing new. I reached for it instinctively. "Dispatch," I said, my voice shaking, though I tried not to show it. "This is Deputy Miles. Anyone there?" Nothing. Then, just under the hum of static, a voice I knew, clear, unmistakable. "Help me." I froze. The hairs on my neck stood up, prickling like electricity. I knew that voice. Not just the tone, the timbre, but the cadence, the hesitation, the small inflections that belonged to someone real, someone missing. I spun around, heart hammering. The room was empty. The monitors glowed. The phone sat silent. But the voice came again, closer this time. "Don't leave." I sank into my chair, gripping the headset like a lifeline. My mind raced. I'd seen the reports. I'd memorized the names and addresses. Some of the missing people were just gone. No witnesses, no traces. And here they were, speaking to me through a radio that should have been dead. I tried to reason with myself. It's just stress. First month on graveyard shift stress. You're tired. You're imagining things. But the voice, it wasn't imagination. Not really. It carried weight, a presence, and with each word, a dread that wrapped itself around my chest. The radio crackled again, this time with multiple voices. They overlapped, soft, urgent, pleading, a chorus of absence. I recognized some of them. Mr. Jensen, young Tommy Harris, Mrs. Caldwell. Their voices fragmented, begging for help, calling my name, even though I had never met most of them in person. I pressed a headset to my ear, straining, leaning into it. "Where are you? What do you want?" My voice felt small, swallowed by the room. Static answered. Then one voice, closer than the rest, a whisper so intimate I could feel it in my chest. "We're watching." My stomach dropped. My hand shook. The air in the station seemed to thicken, pressing down, heavy and almost solid. I swallowed hard, trying to calm myself. I tried to tell myself it was a trick, that the radio was malfunctioning, but the voices didn't come from the radio alone. I could hear them behind me, in the walls, in the corners where light didn't reach. Whispers curling through the air, sliding over floorboards, brushing against my skin. I got up and walked the station, scanning every shadow, every darkened corner. Nothing, no one. The office, the break room, the hallway, all empty. But the voices continued, soft, urgent, impossible to ignore. "Don't follow. Please, help. Miles!" Hearing my own name sent a shiver down my spine. Not spoken by the dispatcher, not by Ramos, but by something else. Something that had been listening, learning, waiting for me to be alone. I stumbled back to my desk, gripping the edges like the wood could anchor me to reality. I tried to reason. They're just recordings, old tapes, leftover files. It has to be. But the voices were live, reacting to me, whispering when I spoke, pausing when I paused, trembling when I trembled. The clock on the wall ticked, a slow, deliberate measured time I didn't want to keep. I glanced at it. 2:37 a.m. somehow. Hours had passed unnoticed. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows, blurring the glow of streetlights. I imagined shapes moving in it, waiting, mirrored by the shadows inside. I couldn't sit still anymore. I walked the station, patrolling like I was outside, checking doors, windows, closets. Anywhere they could be hiding, but it wasn't a person. It wasn't an intruder. There was nothing to see, nothing to confront, just the echo of voices, weaving in and out of silence, shaping themselves into my worst fears. I remember the sheriff's words from the other night. You'll see it in the corners of your eyes. You'll know when it's real. I had scoffed silently. Not anymore. Now, every flicker of shadow, every shift of light, felt like eyes following me. I could feel the weight of presence pressing in from all sides. And then the worst part, I realized I was hearing them before I even opened my ears. Sometimes, when the radio was dead, I could hear their voices in my mind, fragments of conversation, fractured pleas. I started to question what was real and what wasn't. The station became a mirror of my own fear. Every creak, every sigh of the ventilation, every groan of the floorboards carried intention. They were here, watching, waiting. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't log the reports. I couldn't think straight. I tried to call Ramos, the dispatcher, anyone, but the phone lines were dead. No dial tone, just silence, heavy and suffocating. Then the voices grew louder, not just whispers anymore. They pressing around me, urgent, angry, panicked. Miles, help, don't stay. I backed into my chair, pressed my face into my hands. I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to pulse with their presence. The shadows stretching and coiling, darker than the darkness outside. I wanted to scream, but my voice failed me. The silence swallowed it whole. I remembered the faces of the missing. I had seen photographs, read their reports, and suddenly, it wasn't them I was afraid of. It was me. If they were calling out, if they could reach me now, what was waiting for me next? The station, the fog, the voices. They weren't just remnants of what happened. They were a promise. A cold realization sank into me. This wasn't about missing people anymore. It was about the pattern, about the weight of absence, about the way they could reach across space and time, or wherever they had gone, to make me feel it too. I pressed my palms into my eyes, trying to block the whispers, to block the shadows. But even closed, I could see shapes in the darkness, impossible forms writhing just beyond perception. I felt like I was drowning in the station itself, suffocating in its walls, crushed by a pressure that was alive, patient, eternal. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning anymore. The voices ebbed and flowed like a tide, pulling at my mind, whispering threats and warnings, half-lies and truths I wasn't ready to understand. I couldn't distinguish between reality and hallucination. I couldn't tell if I was losing my mind or if I was seeing something real. The clock ticked again. 5:12 a.m. The first light of dawn seeped through blinds, weak and uncertain. The voices didn't vanish, but they faded slightly, retreating to the corners, whispering just out of reach. I sagged into my chair, exhausted, trembling. My body ached. My mind felt raw, afraid. And I understood something then, with a clarity I couldn't ignore. This wasn't over. It wouldn't be over. The station was no longer a place of safety. It was a listening post, a conduit, a threshold, and I, alone on this graveyard shift, was caught in the middle. I stared at the radio, silent now, as if it had never spoken at all. The monitors glowed with normalcy. The phone sat idle. The building breathed around me like nothing had happened. And yet I could still feel it. The presence. watching, waiting. And I knew, deep down, that tonight had been only the beginning, because soon it would call my name again. And next time, I might not be able to answer. I still remember the first time the cornfield seemed to watch me. The sheriff's truck rolled slowly along the dirt road that cut through the fields, headlights slicing through the early evening haze. The air smelled like earth and dry stalks, a sweet, cloying scent that made my stomach tighten. I kept glancing to the side, feeling the tall corn rustle even when the wind was still. We were chasing a cold case, a teenage girl who had disappeared 3 summers ago. Everyone had moved on, or at least they pretended to, but the sheriff hadn't. He drove the same route every few months, checking for signs, retracing steps no one else cared to remember. Tonight, I was with him, assigned to shadow him. I didn't know what to expect. I thought it would be quiet, uneventful. I was wrong. The road stretched forever, a thin ribbon between walls of green and gold. The sun had dipped behind the horizon, leaving a dim, amber glow that barely touched the tops of the corn. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't explain why. It wasn't the darkness. I've driven at night before. It wasn't the corn, either, though the stalks pressed close, like the fields were holding their breath. "You feel it?" the sheriff asked, without looking at me. His hands were steady on the wheel, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the shadows. I blinked. "Feel what?" "That," he said, gesturing vaguely. "The watching, the waiting." I laughed nervously, though my throat was tight. "Watching what?" He didn't answer immediately, just drove on, slow, deliberate. The wind whispered through the corn, a susurration that sounded almost like voices. I thought I imagined it, until he said, "It's never just wind. Listen." I leaned out the window, trying to catch a pattern. Nothing, just the rustle of leaves and the low hum of the truck's engine. But then, faintly, almost beneath hearing, I heard a murmur. Words, maybe, or laughter, soft and broken. I froze. "What is that?" I asked, gripping the door handle. The sheriff didn't answer. He just drove, eyes forward, shoulders tense. The whispers grew louder, or maybe I was imagining it. Every time I thought I was hearing something clear, it slipped away, leaving only the rustling corn. I remember the file I had read earlier that day, the girl's name, the last place she had been seen. A small town like ours, roads lined with cornfields just like this. I remembered the reports. She had gone out with friends, left the festival early, and never returned. Nothing else. No evidence, no trace. Just gone. The thought twisted in my gut, cold and sharp. And now, here I was, driving through the same fields where it happened, feeling the weight of the silence, the absence pressing against me. We passed a bend in the road, and I swear I saw a movement in the corn. Just a flicker, a shape ducking behind the stalks. I blinked. Nothing. My heart thudded, loud enough that I was certain the sheriff could hear it. "You see it?" I whispered. He shook his head. "No, but it's there." The words hung between us. I wanted to ask how he could know, but I didn't. There was something in his voice that made questioning pointless. The truck moved slower, the engine humming low. The corn seemed to close in, shadows pooling between the stalks. I imagined her, walking through the same path, alone, unaware. My stomach churned. I tried to focus on the road, on the sound of tires against dirt, on anything that grounded me. But the rustling persisted, like something breathing just out of reach. "Sometimes," the sheriff said quietly, "you can feel them before you see them. The way the air shifts, the way the world tilts, just slightly." I shivered. "You mean her?" He didn't answer, just kept driving, eyes scanning. I could feel his tension, a coiled energy that mirrored my own. The wind picked up, rattling the stalks, and I thought I heard a whisper again, a soft calling, indistinct but urgent. I clenched the seat. The fields felt alive, watching, waiting. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, the shadows, my imagination. But it wasn't just me. The sheriff felt it too, in the tight lines of his jaw, in the careful way he handled the wheel. We stopped at a small clearing where the field opened up to a patch of dirt, overgrown with weeds. The sheriff killed the engine, and the sudden silence hit me like a wave. The whispers vanished. The corn stood rigid, unmoving, but I felt the weight of eyes on us. "This is where they last saw her," he said softly, pointing to the middle of the clearing. "No one found anything. Not a footprint, not a trace. Just gone." I swallowed hard. I could feel the air pressing down, heavy, thick, as if the world itself remembered what happened here. I imagined the girl standing there, looking around, realizing she was alone. Real fear sinking in. My throat tightened, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to stop myself from speaking. The sheriff's gaze swept over the corn, unblinking, and I noticed how he flinched at nothing, how his eyes darted to shadows that weren't mine. "You'll get used to it," he said, more to himself than to me. "Or you won't. Some of us never do." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but words lodged in my throat. The air felt heavier now, like it had mass, pressing in from all sides. I could hear the faintest rustle in the distance, and I knew it wasn't the wind. Something moved out there, something that didn't belong to the night, to the world I knew. The sheriff restarted the truck, driving slowly back onto the road. I kept my eyes on the corn, trying to catch the flicker again, the movement, the whisper, but it was gone, swallowed by the night. As we drove, I kept thinking about her, the girl. I imagined her footsteps along this road, the sound of leaves cracking beneath her shoes, the quickening of her breath, the terror of realizing she was being watched. The thought made my stomach churn. "Why do you keep coming back here?" I asked finally, breaking the silence. The sheriff didn't answer immediately. He glanced at me, eyes hard, distant. "Because I have to," he said quietly. "Because it's not over. Not for her, not for anyone else. And if we stop looking, if we stop feeling, it spreads." I didn't understand fully what he meant, but I felt it, the watching, the weight of absence, the way the corn seemed to shift just beyond the corner of my vision. I knew, somehow, that something was waiting in those fields, something patient, something that remembered. The road stretched on, empty, endless. I kept my eyes forward, but my mind wandered, picturing shapes between the stalks, imagining whispers curling to the corn, voices calling my name, just faint enough to make me doubt my sanity. By the time we returned to the station, the sun had fully set. The cornfields disappeared behind us, but the feeling stayed, like a shadow draped over my shoulders. I knew I wouldn't sleep easy that night. I knew I would hear whispers in the dark, see movement where none existed, feel eyes following me even in empty rooms. And I knew that when the cold case resurfaced fully, it wouldn't be just a file on a desk anymore. It would be alive, and it would reach for anyone who dared to look too closely. The sheriff stepped out first, silent, and I followed, reluctant, carrying the weight of what I felt in the fields. The corn wasn't just corn anymore. The road wasn't just a road. Every stalk, every shadow, every whisper had left a mark on my mind, something that would not fade. Even now, when I drive past fields like those, when I see stalks brushing against the wind, I can feel it, the watching, waiting, and I know that somewhere out there in the endless green and gold, she is still calling, and I am still listening. The rain had started in the early evening, a slow, insistent drizzle that soaked through jackets and pooled in the ruts of the dirt road. The cornfields were darker now, sodden and heavy, bending under the weight of the water. I sat in the sheriff's truck, staring out at the endless green and brown, feeling the chill crawl under my skin. The call came in just after sunset. A dog had found something, or someone, near the edge of the old field by the creek. I didn't know what to expect when we arrived, but as soon as the headlights cut through the mist, I saw it. Footprints, human but not recent, sinking into the mud like ghostly reminders. They led to a hollow, a depression in the field where the rain had washed most of the evidence away. I stepped out, boots squelching in the mud, and felt the weight of the night press down on me. The sheriff was quiet, surveying the scene with the kind of focus that comes from years of seeing things you wish you hadn't. "They're back," he muttered under his breath, almost to himself. I glanced at him, unsure if he meant the missing girl, the shadows I felt in the fields the other night, or something else entirely. The footprints were half erased by the rain, but enough remained to confirm what I had dreaded. Someone or something had been here, and they weren't alone. Deputy Ramos arrived next, his coat dripping with rain, He stepped carefully into the mud, examining the tracks. This isn't right, he said quietly. These prints, they don't match any shoe I've seen. And the spacing is not human. My stomach twisted. Not human. That thought settled over me like ice water. I wanted to ask what he meant, but words caught in my throat. I felt the rain soak through my jacket, chill my bones, and yet I couldn't move. The air in the field felt heavier than it should, thick with an unseen weight that pressed down on me, pushing my chest tight. The sheriff knelt near the hollow, brushing mud aside with gloved hands. What he revealed made my stomach flip. Partial remains, a small hand, fragments of clothing, bits of hair clinging to the dirt. Not enough to identify, not enough to explain, but enough to remind us all of the girl, and the others like her vanished without reason. I swallowed, my throat dry. The rain fell harder now, pattering against the brim of my hat, and washing the mud from the footprints, as if trying to erase what had happened. But nothing could erase the fear, the sense that we were standing in a place that remembered. Ramos crouched beside me, voice low. You remember those nights I told you about? He nodded toward the field, the ones near here. Shadows in the trees, noises that didn't make sense, shapes moving just out of sight. Nobody believed me, but this feels the same. I nodded, even though I hadn't wanted to. I remembered the lights we had seen flicker through the corn, shapes bending in impossible ways, whispers curling to the fields late at night. I had brushed it off as nerves, imagination, rookie fear. But now, looking at the mud, at the hollow where the fragments lay, I felt it, the pattern, the inevitability of it. Something had been here before, and it would be here again. The sheriff stood, brushing his gloves, his eyes scanning the field like it was alive. They leave traces, he said finally. A pattern in the mud, a smell in the air, a shadow in the corner of your eye. If you know what to look for, you can see them coming. If not, his gaze lingered on the footprints, his jaw tight. You get caught. I swallowed again, trying not to shiver. The rain soaked deeper, running down my neck, chilling me to the bone. And yet I couldn't leave. Not yet. The field seemed to hum, a low vibration under my feet, as if something beneath the mud and roots was waiting, breathing, watching. We started walking the perimeter, careful not to destroy evidence, careful not to stray too close to the deeper parts of the field where the ground sank into mud and water. Every step felt heavier, each one drawing me deeper into unease. I kept thinking I saw movement in the shadows, shapes bending unnaturally, slipping between stalks, only to vanish when I blinked. Ramos shook his head. I've told the stories before, nights like this, people disappearing, dogs going insane, vehicles stalling, shadows that don't belong. We laughed, we wrote it off, but this is real. The words hung in the rain-soaked night. I wanted to disagree. I wanted to say it was coincidence, bad memory, exaggeration, but the partial remains in the hollow, the footprints that didn't belong to any living thing I knew, and the weight in the air told me otherwise. We moved closer to hollow, the rain washing away more of the evidence, erasing the footprints as if the world itself wanted to forget. But I remembered. My eyes followed every detail, every depression in the mud, every streak in the soil that suggested something moved through here. And I realized how alone we were. The field was empty, but it was full of memory, full of absence, full of the waiting. The sheriff's voice broke my thoughts. Look at this, he said, pointing to the far side of the hollow. Small prints, dragging, almost like they were trying to escape something, or leading someone away. They were half-formed, incomplete, unnatural. I crouched to examine them. The mud clung to my fingers, cold and heavy, leaving traces on my gloves. They're not human, I whispered, even though I didn't want to believe it. Maybe not, the sheriff said quietly, but they're here. And that's enough to remind us what happens when you wander too far, too late, too alone. I swallowed hard. My chest tightened again. I thought of the girl, lost in these very fields, footsteps fading into nothing, shadows bending around her, whispers curling just out of reach. And I thought of all the nights since, the missing people, the vanishings, the sense that the land itself remembered, held grudges, or perhaps hungered. The rain picked up heavier now, drumming on our hoods, soaking us through. But it didn't wash away the unease, didn't clean the mud from the footprints, didn't erase the memory of what had been. The field seemed to pulse around us, alive in a way I couldn't understand, filled with traces of presence that refused to leave. Ramos straightened, glancing around nervously. Every time I come here, I see it again. Shadows, movement, shapes. You think you're imagining it, but you're not. I nodded, even though my mind screamed at me to turn and run, to leave the mud, the hollow, the whispering corn behind. But I couldn't. Something about this field demanded attention, demanded recognition. And maybe, I thought bitterly, that was why the sheriff kept coming back. Not to solve the case, not to bring peace, but because the field itself wouldn't let him go. We finished the sweep, carefully, silently, returning to the truck. The headlights cut through the rain and fog, illuminating the field one last time. I stared into the dark rows of corn, half expecting to see her, or the shadow of her, moving just beyond the stalks. But nothing stirred. Only the mud, the footprints, and the weight of memory remained. Back in the truck, the heater on full blast, I tried to shake the chill that had settled in my bones. The sheriff started the engine, but didn't speak. Ramos sat quietly, staring out the window, fingers tapping nervously against his leg. I could feel the tension radiating between us, unspoken and thick, like the fog outside. The drive back was slow, deliberate. The cornfields pressed close on either side, whispering the wind, rustling as though alive. I kept thinking of the footprints in the mud, of the partial remains, of the shadows bending just beyond vision. And I realized with a sinking certainty that the field would not forget, that the past, the vanished, the unknown, it lingered here, patient, waiting for anyone foolish enough to walk through it. By the time we returned to the station, I was so exhausted and hollowed out. The memory of the mud, the prints, the fragments, clung to me. I knew sleep would be fitful. I knew the whispers would follow me into the quiet, pressing at the edges of consciousness. And I knew deep down that the field, with its mud and shadows, would not stop watching. Not tonight. Not ever. Even now, when the wind blows through cornfields or rain softens the earth, I think of those footprints. I think of what they carried. And I know that sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, you can still hear them. Calling, waiting, watching. The night was heavier than usual when we returned to the cornfield. The rain from the previous day had soaked the earth, leaving mud caked to our boots, and the smell of wet stalks hung thick in the air. I could feel the tension in the sheriff before we even reached the field. The way his hands tightened on the wheel, the way his jaw worked silently. I had seen him steady through countless cases, but tonight, something had shifted. The call came in from a farmer, claiming to see strange shapes moving the corn as the sun set. He wasn't the first, but he sounded frantic, his voice cracking over the radio. We drove the familiar dirt roads, headlights cutting through the fog and mist that had settled like a living thing between the rows of stalks. I could see the corn bending slightly as if breathing, and the thought made my stomach churn. The sheriff parked at the edge of the field, glancing at me briefly. "Stay close. Don't step off the path," he said. His voice was low but firm. I nodded, though my heart was hammering in my chest. I had been on graveyard shifts before, had seen shadows, heard whispers, felt the weight of absence, but tonight felt different, more tangible, more deliberate. We moved through the mud slowly, boots sinking slightly with each step, the corn pressing in around us. I kept scanning the edges of my vision, half expecting to see movement, half hoping not to. Shadows shifted between the stalks, shapes bending unnaturally. I tried to rationalize it. Wind, mist, my mind playing tricks after weeks of long nights. But the more I told myself it was nothing, the heavier the field felt, as if it resented our intrusion. A sudden snap, a stalk breaking, made me jump. The sheriff didn't flinch, though I could see the tension in his shoulders. We moved toward the sound. The closer we got, the more the field seemed to close in, the rows twisting, stretching, elongating in ways that didn't make sense. I could feel a pulse in the air, a vibration that pressed against my chest, low and insistent, like something alive beneath the earth. Then I saw it, not a person, not a deer, not an animal, something else, A shadow, taller than any human should be, stretching between the rows. Its edges were blurred, but it moved deliberately, gliding rather than walking, bending and contorting in ways that made my stomach lurch. I froze, breath caught in my throat, mud clinging to my boots. The sheriff whispered my name. "Miles! You see it too, right?" I nodded slowly, unable to tear my eyes away. The thing didn't acknowledge us. It just hovered, shifting between the corn, observing. I felt watched, measured, like the field itself had eyes, and this shadow was a sentinel. My pulse raced, my hands slick with sweat despite the chill. It's not human," I managed to whisper. My voice felt weak, swallowed by the vast, damp field. "No," the sheriff said softly, "and it doesn't care that we are." We edged closer, moving cautiously, trying not to draw attention. The shadow seemed aware of us now, bending slightly as if reacting, though it never fully approached. My mind screamed to retreat, to turn and run back to the safety of the truck, but some instinct, or perhaps foolish curiosity, kept me rooted. The sound came then, not a voice, not a growl, something else, a low hum, vibrating in the chest, resonating through the soles of my boots, through the wet mud, through the air itself. It wasn't language, not yet, but it carried meaning, intent. It was waiting, watching, judging. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I wanted to blink, to look away, but I couldn't. The shadow shifted again, closer now, its form folding over itself, stretching at impossible angles, its presence radiating cold, patient intelligence. I wanted to scream, but my voice lodged in my throat, swallowed by the thick night. The sheriff moved quietly beside me, his flashlight cutting a thin beam through the fog. The light didn't touch the shadow, didn't reveal it. It only illuminated the wet stalks, the muddy ground, the emptiness around us. And yet, I could feel it, a presence, a force pressing into my chest, into my lungs, into my mind. Then the field seemed to change. The rows twisted, no longer linear, bending inward, folding over themselves, creating impossible angles. I felt disoriented, dizzy. My boots sank deeper into mud, though I had not moved. The shadow remained, just beyond the edge of vision, moving with intent, aware of our hesitation, our fear. "You're not imagining this," the sheriff said quietly, voice tense. "Whatever it is, it exists outside the rules we know. You feel it because it wants you to notice, to understand." I shook my head, trying to clear the fog in my mind, trying to anchor myself to logic, but the field refused it. The air shimmered with weight. The mud underfoot seemed alive, and the whispering rustle of corn became a chorus of anticipation, of patient expectation. The shadow began to move differently then, slowly, deliberately, weaving between stalks, its height fluctuating, elongating, shrinking, bending in ways that defied human understanding. And then I saw the outlines of faces within it, fleeting glimpses of eyes, of mouths opening and closing silently, expressions of fear, of pain, of pleading. I stumbled back, heart hammering. What is it?" The sheriff didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes were fixed on the same horror I was witnessing. Something in the air shifted, a pressure I couldn't describe, as if the field itself had inhaled and held its breath. My stomach twisted. My throat burned. I remembered the previous nights, the disappearances, the footprints in the mud, the partial remains, the whispers in the dark, and suddenly it all made a chilling sense. The field wasn't just a field. The corn wasn't just corn. And the shadow wasn't just a shape. It was a sum of all the lost, all the vanished, all the absences made tangible. Watching, waiting, it moved closer. Not aggressively, not yet, but it bent the air, twisted the space, warping perception. I could feel it pulling at my mind, tugging at memories, fears, fragments of thought I had tried to ignore. Every rational explanation, I clung afraid under the weight of presence. I realized then that the sheriff was shaken, not by the shadow itself, but by its implications. He had been through enough. Cases, nights, reports. But this was beyond protocol, beyond understanding. I saw in the way his hands trembled slightly, in the slight hitch of his breath, in the way he stared, rigid and unblinking, into the impossible. The shadow pulsed then, almost imperceptibly, a rhythm that synchronized with my own heartbeat. I felt a nausea rising, a vertigo, as if the field itself had flipped, as if the rows of corn were no longer anchored in reality, shapes twisted in periphery, bending and folding like wet paper, faces flickering in and out of vision. I wanted to look away, to run, to escape the suffocating weight, but some instinct or curse kept me in place. I could feel the shadow judging, assessing, and I knew in that moment that this was a presence that existed outside the physical, outside time, beyond reason. It wasn't just observing, it was learning. And then the impossible happened, a sound, not a voice, but a whisper, a chorus of them, emanating from everywhere and nowhere at once. My name, my thoughts, fragments of memory, hopes, fears, all echoed back to me. The shadow didn't speak. It projected, infiltrated, made itself known to the raw fabric of perception. I felt my knees weaken, my vision blur, my mind straining to comprehend what shouldn't exist. The sheriff grabbed my shoulder, voice tight. "We leave now," he said, before it decides to follow. I obeyed, my boots sliding in the mud, heart racing. We backed away slowly, eyes fixed on the impossible shapes in the corn. But even as we retreated, I could feel it, watching, waiting, not bound by roads, by paths, by reality itself. Patient, eternal. By the time we reached the truck, soaked, exhausted, trembling, I knew something fundamental had changed. The field, the shadow, the loss. It wasn't just history. It wasn't just a cold case. It was alive, persistent, aware. And for the first time, I understood the weight the sheriff carried all those years. He didn't just hunt for missing people. He confronted something that defied understanding, that existed alongside the world yet outside it. Something that could bend reality itself. We drove away in silence, headlights cutting through the mist, the cornfields closing behind us. Every turn of the wheel echoed in my chest. Every drop of rain against the windshield seemed deliberate, purposeful, as if the night itself was marking our retreat. I couldn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my room seemed to stretch, to pulse, to reach. Every whisper of wind reminded me of the corn, the mud, the impossible shapes, the faces within them. I realized then that once you see something like that, once you know it exists, the world itself feels thinner, more fragile, more alive in ways that terrify. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled my soul, that the field would not forget us, that the shadow would wait, that the loss would continue to whisper in the corners of reality, patient, eternal, watching. It was one of those nights where the forest feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. I was sitting in the station, listening to the scanner hum softly when the call came in. A hiker, last seen hours ago, lost somewhere on the northern trails. The kind of call that sounds simple at first, until you realize that simple can quickly become impossible. The sheriff leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the wall map, dotted with pins, some faded, some fresh. "This one's odd," he said quietly, almost to himself. The kid called in before disappearing, said some things. He trailed off, staring at a point on the map. I waited, the scanner crackling quietly, the room smelling faintly of coffee and paper. Some things. I asked, warnings, he said finally, static-filled, garbled, but warning someone, warning us. His fingers tapped lightly on the edge of the desk. "Listen to this." He played the recording again, a thin, scratchy voice overlaid with static, distorted whispering. "Don't follow." The words were broken, fragmented, but the urgency came through. Fear wrapped around the syllables like a living thing. I shivered, even though the room was warm. Who would he be warning? I asked, but I didn't expect an answer. The sheriff shook his head. "I don't know. Something in the hills. Maybe, or something he saw, felt, or imagined, but it wasn't just panic. There was awareness, like he knew what was coming, and it was waiting." I remembered the trail reports from the last few months. People disappearing, sometimes near the same stretch of forest. Some claimed to hear whispers, see figures, shadows that didn't belong. I had dismissed most as hikers' imagination, nerves, or alcohol-fueled exaggeration. But hearing that voice, broken, pleading, afraid, made me reconsider. The radio crackled again, this time bringing the faintest sound of wind through trees, static, and the echo of a voice I couldn't place. The sound was fragmented, distorted by interference, but the emotion was unmistakable. Fear, isolation, a desperate plea. I pressed my hand to my forehead, tried to block the unease creeping into my mind. The sheriff rubbed his eyes. I called the rangers, the search teams, but they found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, no sign of struggle, just silence. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. That's what gets to me. The forest itself doesn't leave traces like that. Nothing should vanish without a mark. I felt a cold prickle run down my spine. The forest. It wasn't just trees, mud, and wildlife. That thought settled like ice in my stomach. What if it had something else hiding in the shadows? Something patient, waiting for the unwary? He turned back to the map, pointing at the trail. Last ping from his phone was here. His finger hovered over a curve in the path where the trees grew thick, the underbrush tangled. He called before disappearing. Said things that didn't make sense at the time. Like what? I asked. The sheriff played the recording again. Static crackled, then the faintest whisper. Go, back, behind the... The rest was indecipherable, but the tone was desperate. Terrified. Real. It wasn't some hoax. It wasn't imagination. I could feel it in my chest, the panic in the voice, the urgency, the pleading. I swallowed, trying to shake the cold feeling crawling up my spine. The room seemed to close in, walls narrowing, shadows stretching. I could feel the weight of absence, the space the hiker had occupied, and now did not. The void of a person gone, leaving only echoes. The sheriff leaned forward, voice lower now. The night, he called. The static wasn't just interference. There was something else. Something in the background. Patterns, almost rhythmic. I can't explain it, but it was deliberate. Something speaking through it. I didn't respond, just listened, letting the recording play in loops in my mind. Static and whispers, broken and jagged, but full of intent. The more I listened, the more I felt the forest press closer. I remembered hiking trips with friends, the way the trees bend with the wind, the way shadows fold into themselves at dusk. But this was different. The forest felt alive, sentient, watching. I remembered the reports the sheriff had shown me before. Other hikers, other disappearances. People found days later, disoriented, sometimes injured, always changed. Faces pale, eyes hollow, voices low and fragmented. And always, the call that came before, or the trail left behind, that no one could follow. The sheriff leaned back, sighing. We can't even trust what the search teams report. Half the time they find nothing, or things that make no sense. Footprints stopping mid-path, disturbed mud with no explanation, strange sounds and recordings. And this kid's call is the worst. We know he's out there, somewhere, but no one can find him. And I think he knew it would be like this. He knew what was waiting. I pressed my hands over my face, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Static and whispers echoed in my ears, though the recording had stopped. The room smelled of coffee, paper, and something else, damp, earthy, like a forest after rain. I could almost see the trees pressing in from the dark outside the station windows, leaves shifting unnaturally. You don't think, I started, voice trembling. You don't think something took him? The sheriff didn't answer immediately. He looked at me, eyes steady, but hollow in a way that made me shiver. I don't know, but whatever it wasn't human. Not exactly. And it wasn't random. It knew he was there, and it was patient. The word patient sank in deep, not just lurking, but waiting, watching, calculating. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. The forest, the call, the static, all of it connected somehow. A presence that didn't belong to this world, yet existed beside it, silent and relentless. I thought of the hiker, alone, lost in the dark, calling out over static, pleading without knowing who or what might be listening. The thought twisted in my stomach. What terror would it be to realize your voice is the only tether to reality, and even that is distorted, broken, intercepted by something beyond comprehension. The sheriff's hand rested on the scanner, pressing gently, almost reverently. I've seen recordings like this before, others missing in similar spots. The voice changes, the static shifts, and sometimes you hear things you're not supposed to. Warnings, names, faces, echoes of the lost. And they're all real. They exist somewhere between here and somewhere else. I swallowed hard, shivering despite the warmth of the station. My mind raced with possibilities, with fear, with questions I didn't want answered. I thought about the woods, the trails, the dark undergrowth where the hiker had vanished. I thought about the forest bending, waiting, and the small, desperate human voice calling into the void. The sheriff turned back to the map, tracing the trail with his finger again. "We'll search at first light," he said quietly, "but it won't be like the others. This place, the hills, they hold things you can't see, can't touch, and sometimes, just sometimes, they let you hear their whispers before you vanish too." I nodded, though my stomach twisted with unease. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. The weight of knowing, of listening, of understanding that the forest could hold something beyond human comprehension pressed down on me. The static and recording, the whispered warnings, the sense of being watched. It wasn't imagination. It wasn't coincidence. It was a presence, patient, deliberate, and terrifying. Hours later, I sat in the quiet of the station, replaying the call over and over in my mind. The words were broken, fragmented, but the terror behind them was real, tangible. I could feel the forest pressing in from miles away, a memory of absence and threat that I couldn't escape. I realized then that the forest wouldn't let go of him, and it wouldn't let go of me either. Once you hear the call, once you recognize the static and the warnings, you carry them with you. The fear isn't something you leave behind. It follows, shapes the world around you, folds into shadows, waits. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear it, the whispering, broken and desperate, calling through static, telling me to be careful, telling me what waits. And I know that the missing hiker isn't gone by chance. He's part of something bigger, something patient, something that waits in the dark and listens. And I know that the forest never forgets. The forest wasn't quiet. Not really. Even before the sun fully disappeared behind the horizon, there was a rhythm, a pulse, almost like it was breathing, waiting for something to move, to step off the path and into its shadowed heart. The sheriff and I set out at dusk, boots crunching on the leaf-strewn trail, flashlights cutting thin lines through the growing darkness. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made my heart jump. The hiker's last signal had come from somewhere along this trail. We followed the GPS pings, though each step seemed to stretch time, to make the journey longer, heavier. The mud clung to our boots, wet and cold, smelling of earth and decay. I kept glancing to the sides, trying not to imagine movement, trying not to think about voices whispering through the trees. But the mind isn't easy to control, not in this kind of dark. "You feel it?" the sheriff asked quietly, not looking at me, just ahead. His beam of light cut through the thickening mist. I nodded, though I didn't want to admit it. "Yeah, like the forest is alive." He grunted. "It is, just not the way you learned in school." "Not exactly." His voice was low, careful, like saying it out loud might make it true. We moved deeper. The air changed as we stepped past the familiar portions of the trail. It thickened, heavier with the scent of wet leaves and soil. The sounds of the forest shifted too. The wind through the pines wasn't wind at all, not fully. There was a timbre in it, a subtle vibration, as if something unseen was moving through branches, brushing the air with intent. I remembered the call, the static-filled, broken voice of the missing hiker. Each distorted syllable had carried urgency, terror, the warning of something coming, something patient. And now, walking this path, I understood how he had felt. The forest breathed around us. It watched. It didn't need eyes to see. It knew we were here. A sudden sound made me freeze. A branch snapping off to the side, not breaking naturally, but sharply, deliberately. I turned my flashlight toward it. Nothing. Just trees, shadows, the fog curling low around the trunks. My pulse hammered in my chest. "Probably a deer," I muttered, trying to steady my voice. But even as I said it, I doubted myself. The sheriff didn't respond, just kept walking, careful, slow, eyes scanning every movement, every shadow. The trail narrowed, thick undergrowth pressed in, bending the light, folding space in strange ways. I could feel the weight of the forest, the pull of something unseen. Shadows moved just beyond the flashlight's reach. Shapes that didn't belong to trees. Not human, not animal, something else. I blinked, and they were gone, slipping back into darkness. Did you see that? I whispered, gripping the flashlight tighter. The sheriff didn't answer immediately. His hand rested lightly on his sidearm, though I knew it wasn't a weapon that kept him calm. Maybe, he said finally, voice low, or maybe you're seeing what you're supposed to see. That's how this place works. I swallowed, stomach twisting. Supposed to see what? He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured ahead to a bend in the path where the trees thickened, their branches forming a dense canopy overhead. Darkness pooled there, solid, heavy, as if the forest itself pressed down. I stepped closer, boots sinking into damp soil. The air felt charged like static before a storm, but denser, almost alive. Then I heard it. Not a voice, not exactly, but a murmur that threaded through the pines. Low, barely audible, yet unmistakable. The sound of breath, multiple breaths, uneven, deliberate. I froze, heart hammering, scanning the shadows. The forest seemed to hold still, listening, waiting. Do you hear that? I whispered, voice tight. The sheriff nodded slowly. Yeah, it's not just the wind. Not tonight. We moved forward cautiously, the flashlight beam slicing through mist and darkness. Every step seemed to echo, even though the forest should have absorbed sound. Shapes flickered just out of vision, branches bending unnaturally, shadows stretching into angles that made no sense. I felt them watching, slipping between trees, always just beyond reach. My hands were cold, sweat mixing with rain and damp earth. I remember the hiker's call. Static, distorted warnings, pleading for someone to turn back. I understood now. There was something here that didn't move like us, didn't think like us. Something patient, observant, waiting for the unwary. We reached a small clearing. Fog rolled in thick waves, curling over roots and rocks like liquid shadows. The silence was oppressive, thick, and it made my chest ache. I felt the weight of being alone, even though we were together, two human bodies in a place that did not belong to the human world. The sheriff crouched to examine the ground. Footprints, he said quietly, pointing to shallow depressions in the soil, partially washed by rain. Not fresh, but not old either. Someone walked here maybe hours ago, or maybe longer, and they were being careful, trying to avoid detection. I knelt beside him, running my fingers along the depressions. They were irregular, twisted, elongated in ways that didn't make sense. Not quite human, not quite animal. A sense of rawness settled over me like ice. Then a movement caught the corner of my eye. A shadow, detached from anything solid, flitted across the edge of clearing. It bent unnaturally, folding over itself, moving faster than it should have been able to. My stomach lurched. Did you see that? I whispered. The sheriff didn't look at me. He just nodded. It's here. Always here. Just waiting until someone steps too far, gets too curious. I felt my pulse spike, chest tightening. The forest seemed to press in, bending space, warping reality slightly with each inhale of damp, earthy air. The rustle of leaves became a chorus, whispering unintelligible words, calling to us, to the hiker, to anyone who wandered too deep. I tried to focus on the trail, to rationalize, to name what I was seeing, but my mind refused. Shapes bent in impossible ways. Shadows stretched into forms my brain couldn't process. The forest was alive, patient, deliberate, breathing, watching. The sheriff gestured for me to follow. We edged along the clearing, careful not to step into depressions. The air thickened, a tangible pressure on my chest, making each inhale feel deliberate, labored. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes, the pull of awareness from the trees themselves. Then the whisper came again. Not words this time, just a sound, a low vibration threading through the pines, resonating in my chest. The rhythm matched my heartbeat. I staggered slightly, boots slipping in mud, mind dizzy from the pressure. "Don't stop," the sheriff said quietly. "Keep moving. The forest, it knows if you hesitate." I nodded, forcing my feet forward. Every step felt heavier, every breath tighter. The mist curled around us, curling over rocks and roots like fingers trying to pull us down. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision, and I knew they weren't illusions. They were something else. Waiting, observing, patient. A sudden break in the trees revealed a small ridge. The sheriff pointed. "Look." I squinted through the fog. A figure, barely visible, crouched against the ground, not moving like a normal human, but contorting, watching. I felt a chill run down my spine. That could have been the hiker, or it could have been something else entirely. Something that had been there all along, guiding, waiting, breathing with the forest. My stomach twisted. The warning in the hiker's call echoed in my mind. Don't follow it. Don't go deeper. But we were already too far, and the forest didn't care. It had already noticed us. We backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on the ridge, keeping our minds on the path, try to anchor ourselves to reality. But the forest didn't relent. The whispers persisted. The shadows flickered, and the pressure pressed in. I could feel the pulse of it in my veins, in my chest, in the soles of my boots. By the time we returned to the trailhead, wet, exhausted, and shaking, the forest had swallowed the ridge, the shapes, the whispers. Only the memory remained, heavy and persistent. I could feel it lingering, a presence that would follow, patient, deliberate, alive. Even now, when I walk near the edge of the forest, when the wind stirs the trees just right, I hear it, the low, insistent murmur, the rhythm of something breathing, watching. And I know that the hiker's voice is still out there, twisted into the static, calling, warning, waiting. And I know that the forest will never let him, or me, go. We reached the clearing just as the last hint of sun vanished behind the hills. The air had gone cold, sharper than it should have been this time of year, carried with the smell of wet leaves, mud, and something else, something metallic, faint but unmistakable. I could feel the forest around us, waiting, pressing in, holding its breath. Every step toward the center of the clearing felt deliberate, weighted. "Over here," the sheriff whispered, pointing at a depression in the mud near the base of a twisted oak. I squinted in the dim light. Boots, jacket, a backpack, familiar, human. Relief washed through me at first. The hiker had been found. But as I stepped closer, my stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. The jacket lay neatly, almost too neatly, as if arranged. The backpack was zipped tight, but the contents shifted unnaturally when I touched it. The sheriff crouched beside the bag, examining it carefully. "No signs of struggle," he said, voice low. "Nothing that explains how he vanished." I knelt beside the jacket, fingers brushing against damp fabric. It smelled faintly of pine, of earth, and of something I couldn't identify. Something stale, faintly chemical, like the air itself had been altered. My mind refused to settle. How could someone disappear for hours in this forest and leave everything behind untouched? Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, almost lost to the wind, yet unmistakable. My name, the hiker's voice. Or maybe it was something that had taken his voice, something mimicking, something patient. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The sheriff noticed, looking at me with eyes wide and unblinking. "He's speaking?" I whispered. The sheriff shook his head slowly. "I don't think it's him. Not entirely. Whatever's out here, it can imitate. It can reach through the noise, through the static of the trees, and make you hear what it wants you to." I swallowed hard, hands trembling. I remember the recordings, the distorted calls, the static-laced pleas. Now it made sense. The forest had never been empty. The hiker hadn't vanished into nothing. Something had claimed him, or claimed a part of him, and left echoes behind. A rustle came from the edge of the clearing. I spun my flashlight toward it, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw him, thin, hunched, moving unnaturally through the fog. But when I blinked, he, or it, was gone. Only shadows remained, stretching between the trees. I felt the air thicken, pressing down on my shoulders, on my chest, as if the forest itself was closing in. The sheriff gestured toward the trees. Stay close. Don't let it pull your attention away. I followed, every step deliberate, eyes scanning the misty tree-line. The whispers returned, a chorus now, layered over each other. Some were words, some sound that made no sense, but all carried the same intent. Waiting, warning, observing. The hiker's voice merged with others, voices of people who had vanished before, distorted, stitched into the rhythm of the forest. We moved slowly, leaving the clearing behind, but the feeling didn't leave. It trailed us, patient and deliberate. I could feel it bending space around us, the shadows twisting unnaturally, the fog curling at strange angles. My mind strained to understand, to rationalize, but the forest refused explanation. Reality itself felt thinner here, pliable, like a page in a book that had been dampened and warped. A sudden movement caught my attention. A figure crouched low between the trees, watching us. At first, I thought it was a hiker. Relief and fear collided in my chest, but it didn't move like a human. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, body elongated, folding into shadows. And then I realized it wasn't alone. Smaller shapes flitted around it, merging, separating, twisting in ways that made my stomach churn. Keep your eyes forward, the sheriff said quietly. Don't engage. It doesn't want attention until it does. I nodded, gripping my flashlight like a lifeline. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground itself resisted our passage. The forest hummed, a low, resonant vibration that synced with my heartbeat. I could feel it in my chest and my bones, vibrating through the soles of my boots. The path led to a small ridge overlooking the trailhead. From here, we could see the clearing where the hiker had been found, or rather, where we thought he had been found. My stomach lurched. The jacket and backpack were gone. Only the mud remained, imprinted with footprints that led in no coherent direction. Shadows shifted at the edges of the clearing, flickering in ways that didn't obey the light. Did he ever really exist? I whispered, voice trembling. The sheriff didn't answer immediately. He stared at the clearing, jaw tight. I don't know, he said finally. Maybe not. But whatever was here, it wants you to think he did. It wants you to chase that thought, to follow that hope, and it feeds on it. I felt bile rise in my throat. The forest wasn't just a place. It was a predator, patient, intelligent. It didn't just consume bodies. It consumed attention, hope, understanding. It warped the mind, bending perception, stitching echoes and voices into reality until you couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. A breeze stirred the trees, carrying with it whispers and static and the faintest hint of laughter. My pulse spiked. Shapes flitted between the trunks, just at the corner of vision, disappearing when I tried to focus. Faces flickered for a heartbeat, familiar, then gone. The hiker, others, lost souls, all woven into the rhythm of this forest that breathed, that waited, that claimed. I remembered the sheriff's words from the station. Patient, deliberate, aware. Now I understood. It didn't need to attack. It didn't need to make a sound. Its presence alone was enough to twist the mind, to erode certainty, to replace memory with whispers, shadows, and doubt. Let's move, the sheriff said finally. Back to the truck. Stay together. Don't let it draw you in. We retraced our steps, slow, deliberate, the fog curling around us like fingers. The whispers didn't stop. The shadow shapes followed, bending the light, stretching space, folding perception. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps behind us. Every snap of a twig sounded like a warning, a reminder, a heartbeat of the forest itself. I kept thinking about the hiker. Was he still out there, part of this, or had he been claimed, replaced by echoes that the forest could manipulate? I couldn't tell. The line between reality and something else blurred with every step. My mind tried to anchor to logic, to memory, to certainty, but the forest wouldn't let me. By the time we reached the truck, night had fallen fully. Mist clung to ground, curling over the hood, shimmering in the beams of our flashlights. We were soaked, exhausted, hearts pounding, minds frayed. The forest behind us was silent, patient, waiting, not defeated, not gone, just waiting. I sat in the passenger seat, tried to steady my breath, trying to make sense of what I had seen, heard, and felt. The sheriff started the engine, headlights cutting through the mist. We drove away, tires splashing through mud, but the forest didn't release its hold. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision, whispers threaded through the wind, and I knew I carried part of it with me. The tension, the unease, the knowledge that this place existed outside rules, outside understanding. Even now, I can feel it. Shadows bending at the corner of my vision, whispers threading through the night. The memory of the hiker, or what I thought was him, haunts every thought. I know that if anyone follows too deep, listens too closely, or lingers too long, the forest will claim them as well, bending their perception, weaving their presence into the rhythm of the trees, the fog, the whispers. I've tried to tell myself he was found, that the hiker walked out safely, but deep down I know the truth. Some part of him, or what he became, still exists here, patient, aware, waiting for the next pair of eyes, the next pair of boots to wander too far. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the whispers, static voices, urgent, pleading warning. The forest never forgets, and neither do the lost. I had just finished my coffee when the call came in. The scanner crackled like static in my ears, and I could tell immediately this wasn't your usual late-night noise complaint. Someone reported a break-in at 2 a.m. in a quiet part of town where nothing ever happened. Streets lined with identical houses, all dark except for a few flickering porch lights. The kind of town where people left doors unlocked and cars running. Safe until tonight. I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and keys, heart already thudding. The sheriff didn't come with me. He stayed behind, handling other reports, but his eyes followed me as I left the station. I knew he trusted me to assess the scene, to stay rational. But the rational part of me was already tingling with unease. The street was silent when I arrived. Too silent. The only sounds were my boots crunching on gravel and the occasional rustle of wind through dry leaves. I parked the cruiser a few houses down from the reported break-in and started walking, flashlight cutting thin arcs through the darkness. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly in the wind. A cold draft spilled out, carrying the faint smell of damp wood, and something else, something metallic, almost coppery. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves, and pushed the door open fully. Inside, the house was empty. Furniture untouched, pictures on the walls slightly askew, nothing obviously stolen, but the air was wrong. Heavy, thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. I stepped carefully, every creak of the floorboards sounding deafening. Then I saw them, footprints, muddy, irregular, stretching across the carpet and onto the hardwood floor. They weren't human, at least not entirely. They were elongated, slightly twisted, as if the person or thing had bent its weight unnaturally with each step. I knelt to inspect them, flashlight trembling in my grip. The mud was damp, clinging, and smelled faintly of earth, like it had been collected from a riverbank far from here. I radioed in to the sheriff. "Sir, you're not going to believe this. Footprints. Strange ones. Not exactly human." Static crackled, then the sheriff's calm voice. "Describe them." I swallowed, voice tight. Elongated, twisted, stretched in ways that don't make sense. Like it moved differently than we do. He didn't respond immediately. Just static, a long pause. Then, "Stay there. Keep your eyes open. And don't touch anything else until I get there." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get back to the cruiser, to radio for backup. But something rooted me to the spot. The silence was oppressive, pressing in from every corner of the house. Every shadow seemed heavier, darker, curling in ways that made my stomach twist. I followed the footprints into the living room. They ended abruptly by the fireplace. No door led outside from here. No windows had been forced open. The prints just stopped. My flashlight beam cut across the room, lingering on the rug, the couch, the coffee table. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. And yet, I could feel it, watching, waiting. A sudden noise made me jump, a floorboard creaking upstairs. Slow, deliberate, uneven. I swallowed hard, heart hammering. The house was supposed to be empty. I had already called in a report. No one else should be here. I crept toward the staircase, flashlight sweeping the steps. Dust hung in the air, disturbed in small, deliberate patterns. The noise came again, a soft scrape, like something dragging a foot. The kind of sound that shouldn't exist in a house this silent, this empty. I called the sheriff again, whispering into the radio. I think someone or something is upstairs. I don't know. It's moving differently. Uneven. Static crackled, then his voice. Stay downstairs. Don't engage. Observe. Describe. Keep your distance. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Every nerve screamed at the moment I stepped up those stairs. Something would notice. Something patient, deliberate, aware. I could feel in the air, a weight, a pressure, a pulse that matched my heartbeat. I circled the living room again, flashlight cutting across corners, checking windows, doors, cabinets. The footprints downstairs ended in a way that made no sense. They were gone, but the feeling remained. Something had passed through, leaving nothing but this unease, this weight pressing on my chest. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, fragmented, almost swallowed by the wind rattling the old window panes. My name, or maybe just a sound shaped like my name. My flashlight flicked toward the corner, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement, a shadow folding into itself, curling along the edge of the room. I swallowed hard, trying to breathe steadily, trying to anchor myself in reality. This was a house, a place where humans live. Footprints couldn't twist like that. Shadows couldn't move against light, and yet they did. The sheriff's words from earlier echoed in my mind, patient, deliberate, aware. I could feel it now. Whoever, or whatever, had entered this house had not just moved through it. It had surveyed, observed, understood, and it knew I was here. I stepped back toward the door. Every creak of the floorboards amplified in the silence. My pulse raced. Outside, the wind stirred the leaves, but inside, the house remained still, holding its breath. I felt eyes on me, pressing to the walls, lingering in corners I couldn't illuminate. Another sound, this time behind me. I spun around, flashlight slicing the darkness. Nothing, just the air, heavy and still, but the unease thickened, curling around me like smoke. I remember the last break-ins the sheriff had mentioned, incidents months ago, reports dismissed as pranksters or drunks, all of them happening around 2 a.m., always in quiet areas, always leaving footprints that made no sense. I realized then that this wasn't random. It never had been. The prints, the whispers, the shadows, they followed a pattern, a deliberate choice. The house wasn't violated by accident. It had been observed, and we were the final act in a sequence we didn't understand. The flashlight flickered. I slapped it, and it steadied, but the shadows in the corners seemed thicker now, curling, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't tear my eyes from the footprints, from the evidence that defied explanation. I thought of the victims from past reports, neighbors who had vanished for hours, sometimes days, returning disoriented, claiming to hear whispers or see shadows that move against light. Some never returned at all. And now, here I was, in the same pattern, feeling the same weight of observation, the same creeping dread that something unseen was learning, watching, waiting. I radioed the sheriff one last time. Sir, I think I'm not alone. The prints, they end, but it's here. I can feel it, watching. Static crackled, then silence. My pulse spiked. I pressed the button again, louder this time. Nothing, just static. Then a whisper unmistakable, curling around the edges of the room. Don't leave. I froze. Cold sweat ran down my spine. The air felt thicker now, heavy with presence, patient and deliberate. My mind raced, trying to rationalize, but every thought returned to the same place. The footprints, the shadows, the whispers. It wasn't human, not entirely, not natural, and it knew I was here. I backed toward the door slowly, trying not to make a sound. Every shadow at the edge of my vision seemed to pulse, to lean closer. The whispers grew, layering, merging, fragmented, yet insistent. Stay, don't leave, come closer. I stumbled outside, gulping the cold night air. The street was empty, Silent again, but heavier somehow. The houses stood still, dark and unassuming, but the memory of what I'd felt, smelled, and heard pressed into me like a weight I couldn't shake. The footprints I had traced so carefully were gone in the daylight, leaving only uncertainty and dread. As I returned to the cruiser, I realized that nothing about this town was safe. Not really. The quiet streets, the familiar houses, the late night hours. They were all part of something patient, deliberate, aware, and whatever had walked through that house at 2 a.m., leaving prints that made no sense, had chosen to reveal itself tonight. And I knew deep down that it wouldn't stop here. The night had a weight to it that I couldn't shake, even before the first call came in. The quiet of the town wasn't peaceful anymore. It was tense, like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting after the first break-in. Every shadow seemed thicker, every street corner darker. I kept thinking I was imagining things, but instinct told me otherwise. Something was moving through this town, and it didn't follow rules. The second call came just after midnight. A resident had spotted someone or something on the roof of their garage. No footprints on the ladder. No signs of entry from the yard. Just a figure, hunched and still, disappearing when they tried to shine a flashlight toward it. I grabbed my gear and drove over, heart thudding in my chest. The house stood silent, windows reflecting the dim streetlights like eyes. The resident was frantic, wringing their hands, voice shaking as they explained what they had seen. It was there, just watching, they said, and then gone, just gone. I didn't move my eyes, and it vanished. I nodded, trying to stay calm, pretending that my hands weren't shaking beneath my coat. "Show me," I said quietly. They led me to the backyard, pointing toward the roof. The ladder leaned against the garage, untouched, mud-free, clean, nothing out of place. And yet, the air carried that same oppressive weight I had felt before. Heavy, almost alive, pressing down on me, making my skin crawl. I circled the yard slowly, flashlights sweeping across the walls and shadows. My eyes flicked constantly, catching movement that couldn't be movement, shadows folding over themselves. I knew I wasn't imagining it. Something was here. Something patient, deliberate, aware. Then the officer on the radio called in, voice low. "Deputy, we got another report. Same street. Third house this week. Says someone or something was inside the bedroom when they looked up. No forced entry, nothing stolen. Just sitting there watching." A chill ran down my spine. That wasn't possible. No human could peer inside a locked house, in a room with doors and windows secured, without leaving a trace. But the pattern was undeniable. Every report matched. Late night, impossible access, no trace of entry or exit, and a feeling of being observed. I drove slowly to the next location, flashlight and cruiser lights cutting through the foggy street. The houses all looked normal. Too normal. And yet, the shadows felt wrong, thickened, curling unnaturally around corners and fences. My pulse spiked with every street lamp I passed, every rustle of leaves against the window. I arrived at the house. The resident stood in the doorway, pale and trembling. I don't understand," they said. I was asleep. I woke up and it was sitting on the edge of my bed, watching. And then it disappeared. Just gone, like it was never there. I nodded, voice low. "Did it move?" They didn't. They just watched," the resident whispered, eyes wide, darting. And the room, it felt wrong, like it was stretched, pulled. I swallowed hard, trying to anchor myself. Every logical explanation fled my mind. This wasn't human. This wasn't normal. But it was here in our town, and it knew exactly how to appear to unsettle without leaving a trace. I began a systematic sweep, flashlight in hand, moving slowly through the rooms. Each corner, each shadow, seemed thicker than light should allow. Shapes flickered at the edges of vision. Indistinct, impossible. Every step made the air feel heavier, as if the walls themselves were pressing in, folding space around me. I checked the windows. Locked. No signs of forced entry. Doors secure. Nothing out of place. And yet, something had been here. Something that didn't need doors, didn't need windows. didn't follow the rules of our world. A sudden noise made me spin. A floorboard creaking upstairs. Slow, deliberate, not a human step. Not even close. I froze, heart hammering. The air itself seemed to hum with awareness, vibrating in my chest, pressing against my skull. The sheriff's voice came over the radio, calm but tense. Stay where you are. Observe. Don't engage. Describe everything you see. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave, but I couldn't. The weight of observation, the oppressive presence, rooted me to the spot. The shadows moved, folding in ways that shouldn't be possible, curling over themselves, stretching against logic. Then I saw it, a figure crouched in the corner of the room. At first glance, human, but wrong. Limbs bent in ways that made me flinch. The head tilted at an impossible angle, and it was watching. No movement, no sound, just watching. I held my flashlight steady, though my hand shook. Sir, it's here, I whispered into the radio. I see it. It's watching. Its head, it doesn't move right. Limbs wrong. Static crackled, then the sheriff's voice. Stay calm. Don't engage. Keep your distance. Observe. Don't blink. I nodded, breathing hard. Every shadow at the edge of my vision seemed to pulse, to stretch, to lean closer. The figure remained still, patient, deliberate. Its presence pressed against reality itself, bending the space around it, warping the edges of my mind. I remember the first break-in, the footprints that made no sense, the oppressive air, the whispers at 2 a.m. This was the same pattern, same predator, same weight of observation. But now it was tangible, visible, real, and aware of me. I forced myself to take notes, describing every movement or lack of movement, the posture, the angles, the unnatural stillness, every detail, every nuance, because the logical part of me knew that evidence mattered, even if the world might never believe it. A sudden rustle made me whip around. Nothing, just shadows shifting against the walls. But the presence remained, watching, waiting. I could feel it in my chest, in the soles of my boots, in the back of my skull. Patient, aware, deliberate. I tried to rationalize, maybe a reflection, a trick of light, but every rational thought collided with instinct. This wasn't light. This wasn't reflection. This wasn't human. It was something else. Something that had learned how to move through our world, to appear impossibly, to unsettle, to terrify. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to warp in the presence of it. Every second stretched, waited, pressing in from all sides. The residents of the house stayed huddled in a corner, eyes wide, unable to leave, unable to understand what was happening. And I stayed with them, flashlight trained, heart hammering, mind racing. Then it moved, not abruptly, not like a human would move. Slowly, deliberately, folding into shadows, slipping across walls, bending angles, vanishing and reappearing in impossible spaces. I could see it in the corner of my eye, then another, then gone. Each reappearance made my stomach twist, my chest tighten. I radioed the sheriff again, voice tight. It's moving in ways impossible. Up the wall, across the ceiling. No one could move like that. I don't know how. Static crackled. Stay with the residents. Keep your focus. Don't let it draw your eyes away. Observe. I nodded, though my hand shook. Every shadow felt alive. Every whisper of wind sounded like a voice. The air was thick, heavy, almost tactile. And through it all, I could feel the figure or figures watching, patient, deliberate, aware. By the time the first hints of dawn appeared, the figure had vanished. No footprints, no evidence, no trace. Just a lingering weight, the memory of impossible angles, and the creeping certainty that it would return. Always watching, always patient, always aware. I stepped outside, breathing heavily, feeling the cold morning air cut through my nerves. The street was quiet and normal, but nothing felt normal. Every shadow at the edge of vision seemed too thick. Every rustle of leaves sounded like movement, and I knew, deep down, that whatever this was, it had not left. Not really. It was still here, watching, waiting, patient, deliberate, and the town, once quiet and safe, would never feel that way again. The night was dead quiet when I returned to the station, the kind of quiet that presses in on you from all sides. Even the usual hum of the fluorescent lights seemed muted, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I set my flashlight and coat down, trying to shake the tension from my shoulders, but it clung like a second skin. Every shadow felt heavier than it should, every corner darker, curling just out of the light. I sat at my desk, scanning the incident reports from the night. Break-ins, impossible sightings, shadows that moved against logic. The radio was silent, but in my mind, I could still hear the whispers, the rustling, the presence that had followed me all night. The town had changed in my perception, even if no one else had noticed. A knock at the window made me jump. Heart hammering, I swung my flashlight toward it. Nothing, just a glass, reflecting the fluorescent light and my own tense expression. I exhaled, forcing myself to calm down. Probably just a branch scraping in the wind. Then I saw it, an eye, pressed against a window from the outside. Not human, too large, too still, and yet aware. It blinked, or at least it seemed to blink, and I felt its awareness press into me, invasive and cold. My stomach dropped. My flashlight trembled in my hand. I backed away, but instinct and curiosity rooted me in place. The eye didn't belong to any animal I knew, and it certainly didn't belong to a human. Its gaze was deliberate, focused, as if measuring me, understanding me, deciding what to do next. Every rational thought fled my mind. I was alone. No one should be there. And yet it was. I radioed the sheriff, hands shaking. "Sir, I think it's at the station. At my window. Not human. Large watching." Static crackled, then his voice, low and tense. "Stay calm. Do not engage. Observe. Keep your distance. You know the rules by now. Don't provoke it." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I couldn't look away. The presence of that eye pressed against the glass like a physical weight. My chest tightened, breath caught in my throat. Shadows around the station seemed to shift, curling unnaturally. Light bent at the edges of my vision. Every instinct screamed to run, to leave, but my legs wouldn't move. I noticed the way the fluorescent lights flickered, as if reacting to the presence. The hum of the station's electronics pulsed subtly, syncing with my heartbeat. It was patient, deliberate, aware, observing my fear, learning how I moved what I noticed. I remembered every report from the night. Impossible movements, break-ins without entry, shadows bending and folding. This was the culmination of all of that. Then the eye disappeared. The window reflected only the fluorescent glow of my own pale face. Relief washed over me, only for a heartbeat. A soft scraping sound echoed from the opposite side of the station. Slow, deliberate, like claws against the wall. I froze, every muscle tensed. I picked up my flashlight and moved cautiously, scanning each corner. Shadows flickered against walls, pulling unnaturally, stretching, twisting. Every instinct told me to stop, to retreat, but my training and perhaps my curiosity pushed me forward. At the far end of the room, near the storage area, movement shifted again. A shape emerged from the shadows, bending light in angles and ways that made my stomach twist. Its limbs were elongated, folding unnaturally. The eye from a window flashed in my mind. This was the same presence, the same awareness, now manifest in a way I could partially comprehend. I swallowed hard, voice shaking. I see you. I whispered. No response, only presence, awareness, something patient, deliberate, calculating. My flashlight flickered, and in that instant, I thought I saw a face distorted, elongated, half in shadow, a mouth that moved in ways that should have been impossible. And then it was gone. Only the oppressive weight remained, pressing against my chest and skull. I thought of every call, every report, every impossible sighting of the night. It was all connected. This presence, whatever it was, had followed me, learned me, observed me. It had chosen to reveal itself now. In the quietest, most vulnerable part of my night, a soft whisper drifted through the air, threading to the hum of electronics and the faint wind from events. I couldn't make out the words at first, just a cadence. Patient, deliberate, intimate. Then I heard my name. Not shouted, not urgent, just drawn out. Deliberate, meant to draw attention, meant to unsettle. I backed toward the door leading to the office. Every step careful, deliberate, heart-hammering. The shadows seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, moving against the light, curling over surfaces in ways that should not have been possible. My pulse raced, breath shallow, mind focused entirely on the presence that had revealed itself to me. Then silence, absolute silence. The weight lifted slightly, but the air remained thick, heavy, almost tangible. I could feel in the corners of the station, in the vents, behind doors, even reflected in the windows. It hadn't left. Not really. It was patient, deliberate, waiting, observing. I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was some intruder, highly skilled, using shadows and tricks. But deep down, I knew better. No human could move like that, bend reality around them, appear and disappear at will. The night, the break-ins, the shadows, the eye in the window, they all pointed to something inhuman, something aware, something patient. I radioed the sheriff one last time before the end of my shift, voice tight. Sir, it's still here, at the station. I don't know how to explain it, but it's waiting, watching. Static crackled. Then the familiar, calm, deliberate tone. Don't touch it. Don't engage. Keep your distance. End your shift. Document everything. It will be here when you return. I nodded, though I felt numb. The night was almost over, but the presence lingered. I could feel behind every shadow, in every corner, in the reflections of the fluorescent lights. It had marked the station. Its attention remained. I couldn't shake the sensation, couldn't escape the weight pressing against the walls and ceiling. The other deputies came in, joking quietly, oblivious of tension in the air. I wanted to warn them, but words failed me. How do you explain something that defies every rule, every law of physics, every sense of reality? They would not believe me. And yet, I had felt it, seen it, been measured by it. I left my post finally, walking toward the cruiser, flashlight shaking in my hand. The night outside was quiet again, deceptively so. Every shadow seemed to watch, to fold against itself, waiting. I glanced back at the station one last time. In the window, I thought I saw a flicker, a shadow, a glint of something watching. I swallowed hard, stomach twisting. The shift was over, but the presence remained. Not just in the station, but in my mind, in every shadow I passed, in every corner I glanced at, in every fleeting reflection. It had followed me through the night, through the reports, through impossible break-ins, and it had left its mark. Patient, deliberate, inhuman. I climbed into the cruiser, doors locking behind me, lights cutting through the fog. And yet, even with the engine running, I felt its awareness pressing against the glass, pressing against the walls, pressing into me. I realized then that this presence didn't leave. Not really. It waited. It observed. And next time, it might not be content to remain hidden. I drove off, headlights cutting through the fog, but the memory of that eye, the distorted limbs, the impossible movements haunted me. Shadows seemed to flicker at the edges of my vision, and I could feel it measuring, learning, waiting. I knew it would be here when I returned. And I knew, deep down, that the station would never be safe again. Even now, I can feel it lingering, patient, deliberate, aware, watching, always watching. I first heard about it over the scanner. A call that sounded routine at first, but the tone of the voice on the other end made the hairs on my neck stand up. A car had vanished. Not just parked and gone, not just a runaway, but gone as though it had never existed. Witnesses swore it had been there. Headlights cutting through the night, the engine humming faintly and then nothing. The stretch of highway was notorious for accidents, sharp turns, long shadows stretching across the asphalt at night. But I'd never encountered anything like this. The dispatcher's voice trembled slightly as she read the notes. Driver, last seen at mile marker 42. Witnesses report headlights, then gone. I drove out there that night. Cruiser lights reflecting on the wet asphalt. Rain had started to fall in slow, cold drops, glinting on the blacktop, turning the road into a mirror of the dim highway lamps. I kept thinking about the witnesses, their fear palpable even through the radio reports. They had all described the same thing. Headlights, then the headlights gone, a feeling of weight in the air, and a silence that didn't belong. I stopped at the first marker and leaned out the door, listening. The wind hummed in the power lines, carrying an almost tangible pressure that made the hair on my arms bristle. A couple of cars passed in the distance, beams cutting through the mist. Nothing unusual, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, or that the road itself was watching. I pulled over further down, stopping near where the last witness claimed to see the vehicle. Mud and gravel clung to the shoulder of the road. Broken twigs scattered across the guardrails. It was quiet, too quiet. I stepped out, boots crunching against the wet gravel, flashlight cutting through the darkness. I could see the outline of the road ahead stretching endlessly, glinting with the rain. My breath caught in my chest. It was like the highway had swallowed the car whole, leaving nothing but space and shadow. A chill ran through me as I thought about the driver's testimony. They had said the headlights vanished, but not gradually, not like any normal distance fade. One moment they were there, illuminating the road, the next just gone. No skid marks, no sign of a crash, nothing to indicate where they'd gone, just absence. I wanted to shoulder slowly, trying to ground myself. I kept expecting to see the vehicle around the next bend, maybe up ahead, half hidden in the mist, but the highway seemed to stretch further than it should, fading into a black horizon, and the silence it pressed in thick and tactile, filling my ears with emptiness. When I radioed the sheriff, my voice sounded hollow even to me. "Sir, the witness reports match. Mile marker 42. No sign of the car. Air feels heavy, like something's been here, watching." Static crackled over the line, and then his calm, deliberate voice. "Stay on the shoulder, mark everything. You know the pattern. Do not chase shadows." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. The pattern. That phrase rang through my mind. The same pattern that had haunted other reports. The same mile markers. The same weight in the air. The same impossible disappearance. And every time it happened, someone remembered, someone feared, and someone wondered if it might be them next. A breeze stirred, carrying with it the faint scent of burning rubber, though no car had passed. My stomach twisted. I thought about the last witness, their eyes wide and pale in their porch light, repeating the words over and over. It just vanished right in front of me, and then nothing. I stayed there until the rain lightened to a drizzle. I walked the shoulder, noting every tire track, every skid mark, every imperfection in the asphalt. Some looked recent, as if a vehicle had raced through, tires squealing against a wet surface, but none matched the time frame of the reports. None explained the absence. When I finally got back to the cruiser, the fog had rolled in thick, curling around the headlights like smoke. I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I sat there for a long moment, listening to the wind in the power lines, thinking about the witnesses' faces, the vanishing car, and the heavy, almost sentient feeling in the air. The highway hadn't just swallowed a car. It had swallowed certainty, left only absence. And I knew, deep down, that we hadn't seen the last of it. I returned the next night, this time with a deputy from the sheriff's office. 2 sets of eyes are better than one, especially when you feel the road's awareness pressing down on you. We parked near mile marker 42, the same stretch where the previous reports had begun. The rain had cleared, leaving a cold fog that clung to pavement, obscuring everything beyond a few dozen yards. The first thing we noticed was the tracks, not the normal tire grooves of passing cars. No, these were wrong. They twisted slightly, as though the tires had flexed in ways they weren't meant to. Tracks that veered off the asphalt, over the shoulder, into the grass, only to vanish entirely, like the road itself had absorbed them. I knelt to inspect them, flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. The mud clung in weird, inconsistent patterns. Some impressions were too long, too thin, others short, unnaturally wide. None of them made sense. My stomach churned. I could feel the presence in the air, thick, deliberate, patient, watching. "Do you see this?" I whispered to the deputy, voice tight. He leaned in, flashlight cutting over the tracks. "Yeah, That's not possible. Tires can't leave prints like that. We followed the tracks for a while, moving slowly, flashlight beams dancing across the fog. Every now and then, we'd hear it. A faint engine hum. Somewhere ahead, low and distant, but never approaching. Always fading, leaving the night thick with silence. I called it over the radio. "Sheriff, strange tracks. Engine noises distant. Road signs missing or wrong. Something's here." Static crackled, then calm voice. "Document everything. Keep your distance. It's not a car, not in the way we understand." The words chilled me. I thought of the missing car, the witnesses, the weight in the air, and a creeping thought pressed into my mind. If this wasn't a car, then what were we even following? We moved on, flashlight beams cutting across mile markers. Some markers were gone entirely. Others were skewed, leaning at impossible angles. I rubbed my eyes. Did these markers always bend like that? The deputy shook his head, unease clear in his eyes. No, they were straight last night. Definitely straight. The road seemed to stretch further than it should, the fog curling around us like smoke. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected headlights to appear. But there was nothing, only tracks leading into the mist, into nowhere, vanishing as if the highway itself had swallowed them. I remember the engine noises. Not growls, not rumbling, not mechanical. They had a weight to them, a pulse that pressed against my chest. Almost alive, almost deliberate. Every time we tried to trace them, they would fade, leaving only silence and fog. And then we saw it, or rather, the aftermath. A road sign, twisted, bent backward at an impossible angle. Paint flaked off, tire marks leading directly beneath it. But nothing had passed through recently. No evidence of passage. No debris. Nothing to explain the disturbance. Only a weight in the air, almost tactile, like the presence was lingering, deliberate, waiting. I felt it then, the way the fog clung more heavily to us in certain places, the way shadows seemed to fold against the road, the way the silence wasn't empty, but deliberate, patient, watching, learning. "Keep your eyes open," I muttered under my breath. The deputy nodded, flashlight scanning ahead. Neither of us spoke for a long stretch. Only the crunch of our boots on the gravel shoulder and the whispering wind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the road itself was alive, guiding us, studying us, shaping every step we took. Suddenly, I thought I saw a movement at the edge of the fog, a flicker, a reflection of headlights, a shimmer of metal, but it vanished before I could get a proper look. My heart hammered. The road wasn't just haunted. It was aware, shaping reality itself. Or maybe just bending our perception. We moved on, documenting every track, every bend, every oddity in the markers. But the fog thickened, curling tighter around the beams of our flashlights. The engine noises returned, low and distant, sometimes near, sometimes fading into nothing. I could feel the pressure of the unseen presence pressing down on me, patient, deliberate, and human. And then the tracks led to nothing, vanished entirely. No continuation into the fog, no signs of where they went. Only silence, cold air, and the weight of knowing we weren't alone. By the final night, I knew we were chasing something that shouldn't exist. The reports had multiplied, calls streaming in like a slow pulse of panic along the highway. Officers missing, vehicles disappearing, witnesses terrified. And we kept coming back to the same stretch, mile markers 42 through 47. The road folding into fog, bending reality around itself. We started at dusk, deputy beside me, cruiser lights cutting through the mist. Every mile marker we passed seemed stretched, elongated, the fog curling unnaturally around each sign. Tire tracks twisted and vanished repeatedly. Engine noises hummed faintly, drifting across the asphalt, never approaching, never leaving, just present. I thought about the missing officers, the ones who had gone out to investigate previous nights and hadn't returned immediately, only to reappear days later with blank eyes, voices trembling as they recounted impossible occurrences. Some never returned at all. I felt the weight of that history pressing down as we moved. We reached the point where the last report had originated. A cruiser had been abandoned, doors locked from the inside, engine running but no driver in sight. I froze when I saw it. Signs of struggle inside. Dash lights flickering. Radio static crackling with faint, distorted voices. Personal effects scattered. A bottle tipped over. A map with smeared ink. Evidence of something impossible. I climbed out, flashlight in hand. The deputy stayed behind, hesitant. Every instinct screamed to leave, to call backup. But I couldn't. Not yet. The air was thick, oppressive, almost tactile. Every shadow seemed alive, curling against itself, bending in ways that shouldn't happen. I could feel the presence here, patient, deliberate, waiting. A faint engine noise hummed nearby, but no car was visible. The abandoned cruiser reflected the fog, distorted, as though the world itself were bending around it. I moved closer, every step deliberate, trying to understand, to rationalize. The footprints outside the cruiser were wrong, elongated, twisted, as if whoever or whatever had entered had bent reality along with them. I radioed in. Sir, cruiser found. No driver. Signs of struggle. Footprints twisted. Engine noises still present. Not human. Not logical. Static crackled. Then calm. Stay there. Document everything. Do not engage. Keep your distance. End your shift as scheduled. It will be here when you return. I nodded, though I knew it would be impossible to leave this night behind. The presence pressed into the fog, wrapping around the cruiser, folding shadows against the road, curling reality. I could feel it studying me, learning, waiting, patient, deliberate, inhuman. We stayed until dawn, documenting tracks, noting anomalies, scanning the fog for movement, but the weight never lifted. Tire marks vanished into nothing. Engine hums faded and returned. Every mile marker, every shadow, every whisper in the fog reminded us that this road didn't follow normal rules. And whatever it was, it had chosen tonight, as it always did. The highway stretched endlessly. The cruiser, the fog, the abandoned road, all seemed suspended in time. And I realized that the missing officers, the vanished car, the twisted tracks, they were not accidents. They were part of the pattern. A pattern we could observe, but never control. By the time daylight broke, we had enough evidence to fill reports, notes, photos, sketches, but we hadn't solved anything. The road remained alive, aware, patient, waiting. And I knew that no matter how many times we came back, no matter how many shifts we worked, the weight of the unseen would never leave. I drove away, headlights cutting through residual fog, mind heavy with images of twisted tracks, impossible tire marks, abandoned cruisers. The road stretched on endlessly behind me, a corridor of impossibility, leaving a presence that will haunt the station and every mile marker forever. Even now, I can feel it, patient, deliberate, watching, waiting, and I know, deep down, the vanishing car was only the beginning.